Okay, some of the monitors I'm about to rank have this little red frame around them, and this just indicates that I haven't reviewed them yet, so I'm rank them based on the testing that others have done, and therefore I'm a bit less confident about their ranking. All the other monitors though, I've tested myself. So let's start with the LG OLED, which actually is the monitor I'm using right now, and the one I've pretty much been maining since its launch. And yeah, the image quality of the OLED panel is just amazing. Response times are the fastest you can get, and the 240Hz refresh rate is also great. I'm still not gonna put it into the S tier though, and that's because OLED in general still has quite a few drawbacks, like the color fringing issues, the low maximum brightness, and the risk of burn-in, which makes this almost a bit of a niche product. It's amazing for gaming and content consumption in a dimmed room, but not so great for anything else. So it has to go into the A tier. But yeah, if you have the funds and all you want is the best 1440p monitor for gaming and content consumption in a dimmed room, it's amazing. Though this one, the 27G-R83Q, is a much more versatile monitor. Also from LG, similar specs, but it's using a 240Hz IPS panel. It gets super bright, has a pretty good color accuracy, and it even has a customizable sRGB mode and support for hardware calibration. For content creation or productivity alongside gaming, this is the much better choice. Contrast ratio is also pretty good for an IPS at about 1100:1, but obviously not anywhere close to OLED. On the gaming side of things, we also get low input lag and fast response times. On paper, the response times of the OLED panel are several magnitudes better, but the difference in-game really isn't that huge. The price difference is pretty steep though. The 27G-R83Q regularly can be had for about $350 to $400 US. I have international links of all of these monitors in the video description if you want to check the current pricing in your region or buy something. Now, at this price point, it already starts competing with monitors of the 144Hz class, which is kinda insane. So, easy S tier. Next up, we have the HP X27Q. It used to be one of my top recommendations, but the price has gone up, and reportedly there have been multiple quite revisions, which also isn't great. I don't think it's competitive anymore, so let's put it into the C tier. Still a decent monitor if you can get it cheap, like for below 200 US, but otherwise there are better options. It's a similar story with the 27GL83A, so I'm also gonna put it into the C tier. And this monitor is part of the reason why the others had to go into the C tier. It typically can be had in the $200 to $250 price range, so it's pretty affordable. But at the same time, it performs really well. It's using a very fast 165Hz IPS panel, and KTC did a good job with the overdrive tuning, so the response times are among the best of this class. It also gets super bright, and the contrast ratio is relatively high for an IPS at almost 1200:1. One of the few downsides is that the sRGB mode is pretty useless. But with custom settings, you can definitely get a really good picture out of this monitor. So I think you guessed it by now, it goes straight into the S tier. It just hits all the right boxes, which makes it really hard to justify spending more on a monitor of the 144Hz class. I guess some people might be put off by the brand, as KTC still is quite new to the Western market, and in that case you might want to go for the G27-4QPF-QD by MSI. Terrible name, but a great monitor that actually performs pretty similar to the KTC. It also has a super fast IPS panel, and it gets just as bright. One of the biggest differences between them probably is the color gamut volume. The H27T22 has about 1.3 times the color gamut volume of sRGB, whereas the MSI almost hits 1.6. So colors are more saturated on the MSI, but also slightly less accurate. Overall, these two are very similar, but I'm actually gonna put the MSI into the A tier. And that's mainly because the H27T22 typically is the better value product. Performance-wise, they're pretty evenly matched, but I'd say the H27T22 has a slight edge, as it has a higher contrast ratio and a lower minimum brightness setting. Really nothing major, but yeah, the deciding factor is that the MSI usually is more expensive than the KTC, coming in at around 270 to 280 US. So if you don't care about the brand name, the H27T22 usually is the better value product. Now this one is another good alternative in the 144Hz class. And I'm specifically talking about the Pro version here, sometimes also just called M27QP. And yeah, it's a solid option. Main difference to the KTC and MSI are the slower response times, probably not that big of a deal for many people, but it's not as fast as the other two. But it's usually about the same price as the MSI, so it really doesn't make too much sense to choose this over the KTC or MSI in most cases, therefore B tier. And this one is actually going right next to it. If I didn't know any better, I'd say these were using the exact same panel, as they perform so similar. But reportedly, Gigabyte are using a panel by LG Display, whereas the Q27G2S is using an Innolux panel. But despite that, the performance of these two monitors is extremely similar. Still, I'm gonna put the Q27G2 in front of the M27QP, as it allows for a lower minimum brightness setting and often can be had for about 250 US, which is a bit cheaper. Now this one is a bit of a different monitor, as it's the only mini LED monitor on this list. It's combining a 576 zone backlight with a VA panel. And this is probably the most affordable way to get a good HDR monitor. And I'm not talking about the HDR 400 nonsense, but actual HDR with almost 1200 nits peak brightness and a great contrast. This is basically the affordable alternative to the 27-inch OLED, coming in at almost half the price. Biggest caveat probably are the somewhat slow response times, with some black smearing thanks to the VA panel. And it's just a 165Hz monitor. On the plus side though, this has a much higher full screen brightness, a regular RGB subpixel layout, and basically no risk of burn-in. So I think it deserves to be put into the A tier, right in front of the LG OLED. I don't want to put it into the S tier though, as it still has a few quirks. KTC released a firmware update that makes switching between SDR and HDR a lot easier now, but it's still not the most refined user experience on the market. Okay, this one is almost a classic by now. Still a solid performer with good response times, but there really are better alternatives now. It also doesn't come with a height adjustable stand, so picking this up really only makes sense when you're planning on mounting your monitor anyway. And if that's the case and you can find it for a good price, I put it into the low B tier. The next one is another S tier monitor. It was out of stock for a while, but it's great to see that Gigabyte brought it back, because this is another affordable 240Hz IPS monitor that competes heavily with the LG 27GR83Q. It's really hard to say which one of these is actually better, as they're pretty evenly matched. If you're planning on using your monitor for color critical stuff, like photo or video editing, the LG is the better pick because of the customizable sRGB mode and support for hardware calibration. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter. Honestly, get whichever is cheaper in your region. Now, the Alienware AW2723DF actually closely competes with the MSI and LG we've just talked about. Performance-wise, these three are trading blows. However, the Alienware usually is much more expensive. There really isn't anything that would justify the higher price tag though. Like, I guess the small bezels are nice to have and the integrated cable management is pretty neat, but it's surely not worth paying much more for. The performance is still great though, so I guess low A tier is fair. Okay, I've actually saved the best for last. This monitor really challenged what I thought was possible for VA panels, because it actually beats the response times performance of the best IPS panels. So this is yet another 27-inch 240Hz monitor, but this time with a flat VA panel. Obvious benefit is the much higher contrast ratio of almost 3500 to 1, which makes this a much better pick for content consumption than the IPS alternatives. For competitive gaming, it really doesn't make a huge difference if you pick this or the LG 27GR83Q or the MSI M27Q X. Technically speaking, the response times of the Innocn are even faster, but in person they really all look extremely similar. Biggest downside of the Innocn definitely is the adaptive sync performance. It flickers pretty heavily, so you're much better off with the IPS alternatives if you're playing a lot of low or varying frame rate titles. One of the biggest arguments for the 27G1S probably is its price. It regularly can be had for 250 to 300 US, which is just insane. Like at this price, it even is a serious alternative to many of the 144Hz class monitors. And currently, you can also get this as an open boxed or refurbished item for even less directly from their website. I have that link down below as well. So yeah, well deserved S tier. Great performance and insane value for money. Thanks for watching, man sieht sich im nächsten Video.